Hi, just wanted to do a quick update to say that I've recently launched a new podcast. It's called the Side Hustle Success Podcast. And I've been making this with my co-host, Kevin Taylor, who is the manager and founder of a company called Steel Beam Calculator, which is a company which lets you, if you're a builder or sort of a building contractor, work out what kind of steel beams you need in your construction project. It's quite a cool idea. So we've just released this podcast. We released episode 1 last week. So there's a link down below to the show. You can listen to it on our website, on YouTube, and also we have a standard RSS feed, so you can listen to it in things like iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Pocket Casts, all the usual places where you would listen to a podcast. So the podcast is about creating side hustles. So what do I mean by that? A side hustle is when you're working for another employer as a full-time job, but you might have some ideas for a sort of little side business that you want to do. So you'll go and work on this in your own time, maybe building a software product or writing a book or, whatever it is. It's something that you're doing on your own time. And then eventually you may want to take this into a full-time career. So it becomes like your own sort of personal lifestyle business or a larger startup. So this is exactly what I did with my company. So I produce training material for Pluralsight, I write books, I do speaking engagements, teach workshops. So my business is all about education and content creation, whereas Kevin's business is a software as a service system aimed at a particular market sector, which is the building and construction industry. So as presenters, I think we complement each other really well because we've both got kind of different stories and different opinions and takes on how to build a business, which is fantastic. What I wanted to do in this video is just give a quick update on kind of how the podcast came about, the story behind it and a little bit of behind the scenes on how we record it. So when I left my job last year, I kind of had in the back of my mind that I really would like to do a podcast at some point. I listen to a lot of podcasts, so I tend to listen to more podcasts than music. And I figured, I'd like to do a podcast, but I really wanted to do one where I'm actually physically in the room with my co-presenter. So, a lot of podcasts do it, over Skype, and then they both record their own audio locally, and it's all mixed together. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, and we are going to be doing that when we interview some guests. But I kind of like the idea of having it be an in-person podcast. But at the time when I left my job, that wasn't really possible to do for 2 reasons. One, I was working from home, so it felt a bit weird, maybe inviting someone over to the house to record. Just kind of didn't feel right. Plus, it's not totally quiet at home. And also, I didn't really have anyone that I could use as a co-host because I wanted someone who was kind of similar to me but different in our businesses so that we could actually sort of bounce ideas and suggestions off of each other. So I had the idea in the back of my mind, but I didn't really kind of do anything with it. Now, earlier on this year, as I said in another video, I came to Cromford Mills in Cromford in Derbyshire, and I went to look at a fixed desk in their co-working space. And on my first day there, I was actually introduced to another co-worker, who was Kevin. We got talking, and one of the things that sparked a big conversation was on his desk. He had a copy of Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek, which is a book that I absolutely love. I've read it several times, and it's been a big inspiration. So me and Kevin, we got chatting about that, and over a space of a few months, we was discussing different, kind of business topics and techniques. And then, a little bit later, I moved into this office, which you can see around me now. It was when I was sitting in the office and I was, I had my whiteboard, which had just been delivered, so I fixed that to the wall, and I was just going through on the whiteboard kind of a plan of what I was going to do over the next 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. And it kind of hit me at that point, well, now I'm in this office, this would be a great time to actually look at doing the podcast. And, immediately when I said that to myself, Kevin came up in my mind. So, well, he works locally. He co-works in Cromford as well as a few other places locally. We're very like-minded in our attitudes to things, but we run very different businesses, which will make the actual podcast quite interesting. So I got in touch with Kevin and sort of just mentioned the idea to him, and he popped over for a quick meeting, and we went through it all on a whiteboard. How often we think we'd record, what kind of subjects we'll do, interviews, the kind of segments and format of the show. And Kevin was really on board with it. He was really quite excited about doing it. So I thought, great, all systems go. So we started planning. We planned out the first 3 episodes, and then we got together, we recorded the pilot, which I edited together. By that point, I'd already ordered hired a freelancer to produce the artwork, the music and the stings and stuff. So we got together, we recorded the pilot, I edited it together just to see kind of how it sounds, and apart from a few sort of production and background noise issues, we was both really happy with how the pilot came out. So we put a stake in the ground. We said, okay, we're going to release on a particular date, which happened to be last Thursday. And we said, okay, let's try and record some more episodes. So we recorded episodes 2 and 3, so they're already edited and ready to release. And that's it. We are recording this regular show, which we're going to release every 2 weeks. At the moment, we're going to meet fairly regularly and try and record 2 episodes at a time, just to give ourselves a big buffer of episodes. The reason we're doing that is because Kevin and his wife are due their second child in October. So we figured it'd be good to get really ahead and kind of record enough episodes to get us through to January, just because Kevin's going to be busy, shall we say, when the baby arrives. So I thought I'd just quickly talk about the process. So I said earlier, I decided that I wanted to record in person. So we record, on the sofa you can see behind me. We sit there, we have the table set up. I have all the show notes on my Mac, which I AirPlay to the TV, so we have everything in front of us. Recording wise, we use this here. So this is the Zoom H6, absolutely fantastic piece of kit. It's not the cheapest recorder on the market, but it's certainly the most flexible. So this is the main recording unit here, so I can plug 4 phantom powered microphones into this, so I can record 4 channels separately. But then what we have is you have these different capsules that come with it. So you can plug this in at the top, which gives you kind of this XY pattern microphone. Then we have a sort of a cardioid style microphone. So if I'm wanting to record live or I want to get audience ambience, I can do that with this. Or there's actually another capsule which you can plug on top, which gives you another 2 microphone inputs. So we have this set up on a little tripod on the table. I plug the mics in. So these are the mics that we use here. They're not particularly expensive mics. They're by a company called BOYA, B-O-Y-A. They're about £40 each. So not the most expensive mics, but they sound absolutely fine with what we're doing. So literally you get the mic, it plugs into the unit here. So we have 2 microphones plugged in there for a standard episode. We both wear the lapel mic, and that's how we record. So once I've recorded an episode, I copy the files back off onto my computer. And to edit it, or to edit the episode together, I'm using an application called Logic Pro 10 or Logic Pro X on the Mac. Don't really have to use anything as advanced as that. I could use GarageBand or another simple editor, but I already had Logic Pro because I've got a music production, sound design background, so I thought I'd use that. I'll show some screenshots of the recording process while I'm talking about it here. But basically, what I do is I have 2 channels for audio. So I have myself and I have Kevin. I run noise reduction over those channels, and I then use different compressors and limiters just to make the sound, give it that kind of radio sound. I then have 2 other channels. I have one for music and one for the sound effects things. So as we go into different segments on the show, I play this kind of like sting, which just signifies that one section is finished and the next one's started. So the typical sections that we do, so we have the introduction, updates and follow-up section. So this is where we will talk about what we're doing in our businesses over the last week or so. And if there's any follow-up from a previous episode, so if we make a mistake or say something wrong or someone sends us a comment, we'll just do a bit of follow-up there. The next section is audience questions. So every episode we'll answer probably a couple of questions from listeners and hopefully give them some advice and some insights.
Sorry, I don't know that.
I seem to set Alexa off there. Okay, don't know what happened there. So we'll hopefully give some insights to the listener. The next section will then be the main topic for the show or an interview. So we'll either pick a topic which me and Kevin discuss, and we'll discuss it from our own standpoints of our own businesses, but just sort of a general information and kind of education section, where we might discuss things like, in the pilot we discussed, how did it feel to actually quit our jobs? What was going through our minds when we did it? How do we kind of deal with that and cope with that? We've got one in the next episode, or episode 2, where we're talking about, is the 4-hour work week feasible? How are we going to do things like about how do you deal with procrastination and remaining focused on your work? So they're kind of typical subjects that we'll discuss. But then we'll also potentially use that section for doing interviews. So I've got some really interesting interviews with people lined up. So we're going to be recording some of those soon, which will be really exciting. And then after that, we have mine and Kevin's pick of the week, where we both recommend something that we find useful or inspiring to the listener. So it could be another podcast, it could be a book, it could be a documentary, it could be a piece of software, kind of anything that we find useful for running our businesses, or something that we found inspiring which has helped motivate us. So that's a general format of the show, and we run anywhere between 40 and 60 minutes. So once that's done and I've edited the audio version of the podcast together, I then produce a video version. So I use ScreenFlow 7, where I just load the audio track up and I have a 1080p backdrop which I just place over the top of it. And then we load that up into YouTube. Because people like to listen to audio in different ways. Some people like to listen via podcast apps. Some people like to listen via YouTube. And actually, we've had slightly more people listen on YouTube on the pilot than we have on standard podcast. Not by much, but probably about 3 or 4% higher on YouTube, which is quite interesting. So once that's done, we then load the audio version of the podcast into a site called Podbean. So Podbean is who we're using to host our podcast. So they deal with all the hosting and the bandwidth issues, and they maintain the RSS feed for the podcast, and that then gets sort of aggregated out to like iTunes and TuneIn and Spotify and all these other podcast libraries. And with Podbean also gives us our website, which is sidehustlesuccesspodcast.com. So they're kind of an all-in-one package, and through that we get some really useful analytics. So we can tell how many people have listened to each episode. We can tell the proportional split of where they come in the world. You can even click on, if you're in the US, it'll actually give you a state-by-state rundown of where people come from, which is really interesting. It will also show us what clients people are using to listen to us. So are they using Apple Podcasts? Are they using TuneIn? Are they using it listening via the browser? Gives us that kind of breakdown as well. So that's it. That's kind of really what I wanted to talk about. Just a bit about the origins of the podcast and a little bit of behind the scenes on the production process of how we build the podcast. Podcasts are relatively inexpensive to do. There was a bit of a financial outlay, so I had to buy the Zoom H6 and a series of microphones. We had to pay for the music to be written. Now, I could have used a standard royalty-free snippet of music effectively, but the chances are that's probably been used somewhere else. So I wanted something that was kind of rocky, upbeat, but ours. It's our theme tune. So I paid for that via a company called, I've forgotten the name of the company now, Fiverr.com. Cost me about £100, but that gives me full global distribution rights and commercial rights over the music. So if we ever turn this podcast into a sort of a revenue-driven business, which it isn't at the minute, but if it ever does generate revenue, it gives us permission to use the music and the stings commercially. So we're kind of covered from that standpoint. So that's it. I hope you tune into the podcast. As I say, you can listen to it via iTunes or most standard players. If you could subscribe, that'd be fantastic. If you could rate the podcast, that'd also be great. If you do listen via YouTube, if you could hit like and subscribe and set notifications as well, that'd be very, very useful. It just kind of helps us kind of track how many people are interested. It gives us a bit of more analytics, and obviously we want your feedback, so we want to make it the best show that we can. We've released episode 1, we've got episode 2 coming out next week, and then we're going to keep releasing episodes every 2 weeks. So thank you very much. I hope you found this useful. I made this video because a few people have asked kind of, the origin story and how we build the podcast. So I just thought I'd record a quick video to show you. So thank you, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.